I'm Dr. Roy Barsness, author of the text Core Competencies in Relational Psychoanalysis, a guide to practice, study, and research, and founder and executive director of the Contemporary Psychodynamic Institute, the sponsor of these interviews. In the first episode of this series, I spoke of the research behind the compilation of the text that resulted in the discovery of 7 core competencies reflective in the practices of relational psychoanalysis. Those competencies, or what I would prefer to call disciplines, are number 1, therapeutic intent, number 2, therapeutic stance, 3, deep listening, affective attunement, 4, the there and then and the here and now, 5, patterning and linking, 6, repetition and working through, and 7, courageous speech, discipline, spontaneity. And a separate but overarching category was that of love. I then recruited various relational psychoanalytic writers to write about each of these disciplines and have interviewed each of them for this series. Welcome to our 6th episode of Core Competencies in Relational Psychoanalysis. Our guest today is analyst and author, Dr. Steven Knoblauch, who authored the 5th competency discipline chapter, Patterning and Linking. Dr. Knoblauch is a internationally recognized clinician, teacher, and lecturer on psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. He has taught and presented at conferences and workshops in North and South America, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And in addition to maintaining a private practice in New York City, he serves as faculty and clinical consultant at the New York University postdoc program in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. And he's a faculty and supervisor of several additional training programs, including the Women's Prison Association. Dr. Knoblauch, as I've come to know him over the years, is also a lifelong activist, speaking out about social political issues, educating us on how these issues are deep within our own unconscious as well as in our conscious awareness. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Knoblauch with us today. And one of the things that I'm so excited about to have him talk about is as an analyst and as a jazz musician, he embodies the body and finds it as a very important aspect of the clinical treatment, important tool, if you will. What I wrote into the introduction to this chapter is the analyst not only considers recurring themes and patterns and how they may be linked to the past and repeated in the here and now. The analyst must attune to the patterns that emerge within the analytic relationship itself. In my research, participants spoke of this as concentrating on patterns of synchronicity and asynchronicity, trying to get a sense of the shifts and patterns that happen between the analyst and the patient as they wonder what these shifts might mean. The linking of patterns within the analytic pair are often felt before they are known. I would say most always felt before they're known, appearing, as one participant remarks, in very primitive ways, not from the frontal lobe in the left brain, but from the part of that brain that is registering it at the feeling level. Attending to this intersubjective patterning is evidenced in this study by comments such as, I attend to the artistry of how I'm with the patient in the moment. Everything within the hour has some organizing principle. The patterning is organic and artistic. Both patient and therapist occupy roles. The question is, how is it being played out? What is the relationship doing? What can I be doing with my patient, and what is the patient doing with me? In this chapter, Dr. Knoblauch, psychoanalyst and musician, refers to this process as the polyrhythmic weave, likening psychoanalysis to the music of the samba, highlighting in the subtle micro moments of clinical interaction the emergent affective meanings that are being constituted within the rhythmic dialogue. In each of these series, I've also placed the properties for you to look at that are actually direct quotes from the research participants. In patterning and linking, we listen for recurring themes and patterns within the dyad, the shifts and patterns, roles that are being assigned and played out, matches, mismatches, thoughts and affects, and bodily experiences. Steve, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for your contribution to this text. This essay has so much feeling to it. Like I say, it feels embodied, immersive, affectively attuned as you and your patient work hard to discover, as you say, a vitality as opposed to it going into states of deadness and emotional anesthetization. The case that Dr. Knoblauch talks about in this chapter is the case of Denise, and it's just a wonderful one to experience. And as you will note, I use the word experience because it wasn't a read. I actually felt like I was within the therapeutic case as it was being recorded. It is clear that your side gig as a jazz musician is present in your work, and it also clearly rings throughout this entire chapter. To give our listeners a sense of this chapter, I just want them to hear some of the powerful words that appear in your essay. Words and themes such as bodily sensations, changing affective states, the viscera, the gut, rhythms, crescendos, decrescendos, accents, our eyes met, our sound shapes, voices, gestures, muscle, improvisations, syncopations, patterns, linking. In these captivating poetries, I find my own body enlivened and reminded of how powerfully linked we are to one another through our senses, our emotions, and our bodies. And to our listeners, I trust them when upon listening to our interview today, that you will also be challenged to return to your work and to pay attention to your gut, to your viscera, as it is informing you and your patient and the patterns and linkings that are going on. This is a marvelous case, Steve, and it reads so richly that I almost just want to read it to us, but unfortunately we don't have the time. But if you could take us into the case of Denise and how you experienced that, and how, as I felt, you were listening to your body and to what your body was telling you, that would be really helpful for us all.
Yeah, okay. What I want to try to do is use words, but keep us all aware of how words can disguise as well as reveal. And particularly because of the distinction, using words, between what we symbolize, what we represent in words to give structure and meaning and connection, and what, to use Wilma Bucci's term, we call the sub-symbolic, or that which really defies structure. It defies words because it's moving, and so it's almost like the principle from physics, where if you try to measure something, you stop it, and then you miss out on so much of what that phenomenon is about. You take a particular moment and you miss the wave of experience that consists of so many particular moments. And yet we're faced with the limits of our human perception, and we have to parse things out. So I just want to say that out loud to keep it in mind for myself and for all of us as I try to put words to this experience.
And I want to comment on that. That one of the things that I consistently teach is we feel things before we think them, but we prioritize thinking over what has just been registered in us, in our bodies. And as you use the word sub-symbolic, that whole idea of what is not yet formed, that we curtail its formation by not letting that affective experience flow.
Yeah, I think what's really important is that there's a tension between our training, which is helping us to develop perspectives and lenses for understanding what's happening and what we're going through, what our patients are going through. And yet, to use the experience of being a jazz musician, when you improvise, you want to free yourself from your expectations. You want to open up the possibility of something spontaneous emerging. And of course, it can't be spontaneous if you reflect on it. And the principle that I was referring to from physics a second ago is called the uncertainty principle. That and of course, so I'm sort of trying to be aware of allowing uncertainty to exist, no matter how much my mind or my attempt to mind to attend uh,
Mhm.
is an attempt to create some kind of orientation, some kind of certainty, some kind of knowingness, uh, some kind of control or containment. But the more that I can balance that with vulnerability and uncertainty and openness, uh, that's a goal, more happens. And as you point out, the way that as a jazz musician does, what I try to do is listen to something that's below what's formulated, the rhythm, the sonorous sounds of the prosody of what we're doing.
Mhm.
So I don't know, this is changing the rhythm and I'm changing the prosody now. That would be something very important if that was
Mhm.
happening for me or for my patient. So the just to quickly overview the case, I opened it up with a description using words of the kind of atmosphere. The day was a winter day. It was cold. It was dreary, and uh, this is a patient whose life somehow is almost reflected in the day, and she often comes in and begins, by moaning and complaining, and her presenting problems and her way of relating has to do with a kind of undoing of anything good for herself. It's never good enough, and so she comes in, and instead of moaning, she grunts, and I'm I'm taken into a new universe.
Mhm. Mhm.
All of a sudden, I realize there's something happening here, and she's so different. And I feel it in my body, and it's clearly in her body. And then we take off from there. And it turns out that the beginning of the session, it has a lot to do with her not only dissatisfaction with herself, but with me.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, it's not uncommon for patients to, it's sometimes thought of as transference, but I think it's more like they're sharing their suffering with you because that's what they're paying you to do, to enter into
Mhm.
their suffering and help them to navigate it. Now, that's a point I make often, and a word I use. So, what I mean by that is to reflect a bias I have, which I don't really think thinking in medical model terms is very helpful in our work.
Right.
I don't think cure is helpful. I think particularly with this patient, to think of cure would be to repeat, speaking of patterning, to repeat uh, a pattern that she does, which is to create an expectation that's unrealistic, and then to feel defeated and helpless and hopeless. Um,
Mhm.
I think cure, first of all, even in the medical profession, is relative. We cure a cold, but that doesn't mean people can't get
Mhm.
sick again. Um, I think much more likely, more realistically, in terms of navigating the tensions of life, navigating the tensions between trust and fear.
Yeah.
And
Can I quote
that's,
you on that? I want to quote you on page 154,
oh, okay.
where you say, to account for this attention to emotional fluidity, I prefer to use the term navigating rather than containing. In a process of navigating, the therapist is holding affective patterns lightly, as softly assembled. The therapist is cautious about creating too much or too little emotional responsiveness that could constrict or foreclose. And just like even when you went from moaning to grunt, like already you're navigating
That's right.
and sorting it out. And what is the affective shift that just took place here?
Yeah, yeah. And even navigating uh, can be tricky because um, you could fall into an intention. Oh, we need to do this. We need to go here. Um, it's the best word I've been able to come up with, but I think there's something better. I don't have the word yet. Something about um, uh, connecting, but also connecting could also feel like containing. Um, but there's a way of moving, keeping the movement going. That's that
Yeah.
rhythm, that polyrhythmic weave, and knowing that it's not a simple movement.
Right.
It's not linear. It's not nonlinear, um, and it can't be really captured by these interpersonal models, which are kind of geometric or algebraic. The idea of libido, moving from one structure to another. It's much more, there's a fellow, Sheldrake, Cosmo Sheldrake, who just wrote a book about the life of mushrooms and all of the life that happens under the earth and
Well,
how networked and fine, uh, extremely complicated it is, but yet it's so life-giving and so alive. And I
mhm.
think that we live in that kind of a web of tensions.
Yeah.
So, with each other and within ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's what Philip Bromberg was trying to get at with self states. I think it's what Bion was trying to get at when he was saying, you know, don't try not to remember what you know. Try to be
Mhm.
open to something new.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
try not to desire anything for the patient because what you desire may in fact not be what the patient desires or not be what could happen, which
Yeah.
could be more important than what you or the patient desires.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's sort of like trying to stay in that movement um, that you stay in when you're playing jazz, to be
Mhm.
with the others, with the audience, with the players, not getting ahead, not falling behind, and so constantly being ready to be surprised by even what you comes out of your own instrument, or your own voice.
I think what's
So
interesting, and maybe I'm wondering if part of I really like the navigating versus containment, but with your wondering about that word,
yeah,
uh, it might leave it just that you are the navigator. But when you're in a jazz ensemble, there's multiple navigators, right? But there
that's
is
right.
someone who somehow keeps the beat
Yeah,
going,
yeah,
and I think that's our role in part. While we're paying attention to the weaving in and out of the
yeah.
other players. Yeah.
Well, a good percussionist maintains a kind of implied beat, which sometimes gets expressed explicitly, sometimes implicitly, but also um, elaborates the music through accents, through rhythmic accents, pauses or accents. And
Mm-hmm.
I pay a lot of attention in that case description to the pauses and the accents, to the shiftings, like when her voice gets stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when I find myself shifting from fear or anger to sadness in response to her sadness. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the beautiful thing about that, when I wrote the fuller paper that anecdote, that clinical description came from, is I noticed that because we are human and we think symbolically and we speak in symbols and we represent things, uh, when you try to navigate in this way, you end up moving back and forth between the symbolic and the sub-symbolic. But what's really important is what comes out in the symbolic results from your immersion in the sub-symbolic. So
Absolutely.
so by paying attention to my body, my sadness, and her sadness, all of a sudden we realized that what seemed like her self-destructive activity um, hadn't begun, you know, earlier in life, which often is the way that theory suggests, but it,
Mm-hmm.
it began at puberty when she could no longer be what she experienced as a kind of boy companion to her father.
Right.
And so when she when we began to kind of feel our way into this, and she had the association to that, all of a sudden it opened up the possibility of mourning not
Yeah.
only the death of her father, but the death of a kind of existence, a kind of hermaphroditic existence, which she was able to pull off until all of a sudden secondary sex characteristics broke in and created a lot of conflict for her because of the way it basically destroyed a lot of the closeness between she and her father.
Right. And if you could comment on, and the way that you got there is you got poked, right?
Right, right. There was a way in which he was really, you know, messing with me in a sense, doing to her what she does to herself, and
Yeah.
what, and she had told me about this game that she had played with a lot of the boys when she was younger in their neighborhood, where they'd go swimming, and they'd push each other's head down underneath the water and hold it as long as they can, and they stay down there, and just let the person up at the last minute. God, I'm glad that they didn't hurt each other.
I know, right?
It's very but kids do a lot of that risk-taking behavior, and it felt like we were doing that to each other. But I particularly became in touch with how she would do that to me in a sense, and make me feel what she was feeling, like never good enough, never able to really get it, and
Mhm.
uh, so that was a way in which the embodied experiences that were going on for both of us and between us, all of a sudden,
I just want to pause there for a moment, because what you're saying there, I would like our listeners to really be able to get, because what happened, as I hear you heard the game, right? And you could have interpreted that, or
well, I heard the game had been described sometime earlier in the treatment,
yeah,
but
but
it came
but
back to me.
it came back to you, but it hit you in your gut. You're going off,
Yeah.
right? And then you were able to link it to the pattern that was occurring between the two of you,
Yes.
where,
Yes.
wait, I'm feeling submerged. I'm feeling unsafe, and like I could die or drown, which
Yeah.
picked up that sense that was in her body, right?
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think what's really important about this, and probably the reason you're asking me to talk about this, and we wrote that chapter, is that the patterning emerges not from talking about and thinking about and linking ideas about the present and the past, but the pattern emerges from the experience, the embodied experience in the moment of the
Yes.
treatment, in the present moment.
Yes.
And then it is able to be linked to the past.
Yes.
But it's not like remembering in one's mind. It's like um, remembering through repeating, which it seems difficult to think about with the original idea that you either remember or you repeat. And when you repeat, you're repeating something that is pathological. But in
Mm-hmm.
fact, and that could still be true, and we were doing that in a sense, but we were repeating something that was pathological in an embodied way, and it led to a remembering of the meaning of that,
Yes.
both in the past and in the present,
Right.
which
Yeah.
led us both to begin to experience a necessary grief, which became a liberating moment, liberating point of shift for her
Yeah.
from so much self-hate and self-punishment to
Mhm.
beginning to allow herself to love herself more than she had.
But I have to say, I really wonder if you could have gotten there if you weren't so alert to and disciplined, really, to paying attention to um, the sub-symbolic, if you will, that which is unformed, and just to paying attention to your affect in order to find your mind around it.
Yeah, I find this is implicit in a lot of clinical descriptions, but it isn't brought out. It isn't
Exactly.
described and discussed. It's there if you look at it. And, a lot of my colleagues will describe critical moments, turning points. and but they don't really make the link
Yeah.
between their embodied experiences and their patient's embodied experiences. And I think that's a helpful thing for all of us, because we have this kind of almost super ego uh, trained into us expectation: understand, understand, understand.
Right.
I
Right.
would say try not to try to understand.
Right.
Try to find that place you speak of: love, connection, um, where both trust and fear exist.
Exactly.
I,
Yeah.
I think love, if you really love someone, you need to get in touch with your own fears of
Yep.
loss and injury. And that helps you to be in touch with their fears of loss and injury. And I think that there isn't a patient who comes to us who isn't suffering. I don't think there's an analyst in the world who hasn't experienced the significance and continues to navigate um, the rhythms of trust and loss,
Yeah. Yeah.
trust and fear of loss.
Yeah. Two things are coming to my mind. One is when you talk about when cases are reported out, there's this aha or this gestalt. And I just had this idea that I think if we were to research those, what was really going on there is when the therapist, the analyst let go and let themselves feel and be present to the feeling with their patient. My hunch is that that's when those moments occur, as they did
Yeah,
with Denise here. But we don't always acknowledge that it's the affective experience that is the transformer.
yeah,
We think it's our mind sometimes.
yeah. Well, I think there's, one of the things that I didn't write about in this paper, but I've been thinking about more and more, is there's this dimension always in play of power, you know,
Mhm.
um, and it's almost like if we lose power, it's terrifying. We're afraid to lose power. The patient is afraid to lose power, even though the patient comes to and says, "You help me. I'm
Right.
giving you the power to help me."
Right.
And but then when you together begin to enter into that process, there's a lot of ambivalence. Freud called it resistance. Um, I'm not sure that's the most helpful way. I understand why he used that term, and also particularly in the sense that he was working at a time when resistance was very important
Right.
socially
You're right.
to
Right.
freedom,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to resist a lot of fascism in those days, maybe still today. But I think the issue is a kind of to go back to our original thinking, to try to stay fluid, to
Yeah.
try not to um, become too structured, to try to be open. And the key to that is to, uh, I find, to attend to my body and the patient's body,
Yeah.
looking at gaze, gestures. Patient does this or this, uh, the
Mhm.
eye contact, movement,
Mhm.
looking away, looking back. Um, of
And
course,
our own
voice.
too, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
I look away going, okay, why am I looking away at my patient?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. you know.
Oh yeah.
And you use
And
the word micro moments, and I think you're describing those right now, where just one, even at the beginning when you said from moaning to grunt, or the turning of an eye, or whatever, is that these are just micro moments that are very nuanced, that are very full of message.
yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I sometimes now at this point in my career take that for granted. But my clinical descriptions are, I think, unlike many, not all, because I don't try to describe uh, the treatment over a long period of time. I try to focus in on a critical moment when something incredibly powerful is happening between me and my patient. And I have to slow down time in my description. I might take 8 or 10 pages to describe 8 or 10 seconds.
Mhm.
And that's where I get into the micro moment, paying attention to the posture, to the grunt, to the eyes, making contact, going back. What does that mean? Is that a challenge? Is that a fear? Is that an avoidance? Um, am I feeling excited? Am I feeling confused? What's going on in my gut? Am I tightening up in the back of my neck? Um, and what do I see happening with the patient? Uh, is the patient shaking in one part or moving around? Is the patient relaxing? Is the patient almost being in a kind of seductive way as they relate to me? Do I feel seduced? Do I feel like I want to seduce the patient? All those
Mhm.
things are things that really bring us closer to what is needing to kind of emerge. What is what is the message of that grunt? You
Mhm.
know, that anger
Mhm.
at herself for pushing her own head under the water over and over again when she's so accomplished and so brilliant and
Yeah.
so good enough, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
I
yeah, the micro moment is important, those pauses.
It keeps, I want to say to you how it impacts my work is sometimes I might get distracted or dissociated or away from the present moment, if you will. And
Yeah.
I'm reminded of, wait a minute, how do I stay in the track of the moment to moment interaction that is happening here? And then beginning to ask myself, why am I going away? What is
Yeah.
being said? What do I not want to feel? All those
Yeah.
things.
My good friend and colleague Adrian Harris has talked about, the idea of soft assembly, which lends
Yeah.
itself to the fluidity. And she wrote a paper once about a supervision in which every time that she listened to the tape that the supervisee played, she would dissociate.
Mm.
And what was happening on the tape, the reason that the supervisee brought in the tape was because the supervisee dissociated. And
Mhm.
so there was this kind of fluid participation that was unavoidable and inevitable, that
Mm.
there was a an affective resonance, an affective uh, atmosphere that was created that uh, encompassed the emotional embodied experience of supervisee, and patient.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to know that that's inevitable. I mean, maybe these days we're calling them enactments and saying enactments are inevitable. And enactments are not necessarily bad. Sometimes a lot of people know that, but sometimes people feel like, oh, shouldn't have done that. I should. They're they're inevitable and they're necessary
Yes.
because they may be the only way that we can connect to something that has been so painful, that has been dissociated, it hasn't been represented, it will never be spoken about. It will only be remembered through the repeating of it intersubjectively, not interpersonally, intersubjectively, because
Yes.
that involves the experience that Adrian had of dissociation,
Mhm.
listening to the tape of her supervisee who was trying to get help with her dissociation,
Yeah.
who's trying to help her patient with her dissociation.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. So nuanced. You just used intersubjectively, not interpersonally. Clarify that for our listeners, because I think it's
Well,
a very important thing.
yeah, I mean, I think some people mean intersubjective when they use interpersonal. So I don't want to
Yes.
accuse people of not meaning what they mean. But
Mm.
for me, the interpersonal is a kind of more geometric experience involving subjects, objects, structure. So it's geometric structure, like you're the object, you internalize the object, or you project. There's a lot of geometric linear movement that interpersonal thinking brings up. The Kleinian thinking, the Bionian thinking, and the 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 uh, the intersubjective, I think, first of all, accepts it's inevitable that we are going to mess up. We have to get into the mess. You know,
Mhm.
the infant researchers understood that. Dan Stern used to write a lot about things being sloppy or messy, and
Yeah.
that it's inevitable. And if you're avoiding that, you know, as Tom Ogden would say, well, then you're not really, you're sabotaging your own efforts. You know,
Right. Yeah.
you have to get into that messy, sloppy place. Um, I remember Ogden wrote at the beginning of Subjects of Analysis, the thing that the patient and the analyst fear most is that they'll agree to work together.
I like that. That's good.
And and I think that part of our part of the mess is to acknowledge that there's a part of me that doesn't want to do this.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that just wants to open up an internet website and, you know, throw messages back and forth. You know,
Right.
I
Right.
want to avoid personal contact. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to
Right.
fall in love and, you know, be hurt. I don't want to fall out of love and be hurt.
Right. Right.
And that's human. That's who
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, why I appreciate the distinction is because I think they are used interchangeably. But what you're getting with intersubjectivity is multiplicity and complexity and messiness that the interpersonal may not have the same. It, like you said, has more objectivity to it.
mhm.
But when you get two human beings in the same room, oh my, oh
Yeah.
my,
And, you know, again, to work with words with care. Care is good word for this. Messy and sloppy could imply that we need to clean something up.
yeah, right,
But maybe navigate is a good idea in the sense that you can't go swimming and not get wet. And in
right,
fact, you want to get wet.
yeah.
But of course, you also want to dry off at some point. And
Mhm.
so it's not good or bad or desirable or undesirable. It's just the way it is. It's just
Yeah.
part of relating. That
Yeah.
things are sloppy or messy, and they need to be in order to sometimes move. Otherwise, they get too frozen, and
Yes.
then you get locked into a state where, you know, all you can do is moan and not move. And that
Yeah.
grunt broke the ice open. That grunt
Right.
opened up
Right.
the flow
Yeah.
between us.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a couple of quotes of yours from the book. I think you pretty much talked about this one, but if you have more to say about it, but you say this, much like jazz performance, patterning and linking is improvised. As a musician, analyst, or sometimes also the patient, varies the original tune, inspired by changing affective states, bodily sensations, and nuance. I think that's, I don't, maybe you have more to say about that, but I really like that phrase of phrasing of yours.
Well, one of the things you learn about as a musician improvising is
Yeah.
you don't just make it up. It's something that you link into or tune into that's happening between you and others.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody gets surprised, hopefully, if you're not trying too hard and you're receptive. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you're staying in the flow and not trying to kind of capture it, you
Yeah.
know, staying with the flow. And so it's really important to understand even the valuing of improvisation. Um, it's something you don't want to get too caught into because you don't want to make yourself improvise. You don't have to
Mm-hmm.
worry. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
things are flowing.
Yeah.
You just need to be open, receptive, and responsive.
Yeah.
Um, and
You know,
that comes from
good.
your body. Yeah, that will
Yes,
come from
it
your
does.
body.
I envy you a bit that you're trained as a jazz musician. I was trained classically, and my teachers always got so mad at me because I wanted to improvise, and so they always kept bringing me back to, you know, here, that's not there, Roy, it's not there. And I'm
Yeah,
going,
but
but something
now as
else
a
is there.
psychoanalyst, you can improvise.
Exactly. I think
And
that's why. I think it's my what I came back with. Yeah,
what was your instrument?
piano.
Piano. So now you could go back to the piano and you could start making up your own melodies and your own harmonies.
I know. I know it. I know. Another quote that I want to quote you on it. It's important to note that the question, what am I feeling and how is this related to the patient? I constantly teach and screech out that it's affect first. And we got a letter years ago. I was deeply influenced by Erwin Singer. I was reading his book, and he said, we got to pay attention to our viscera. And I go, viscera, yes, that's it. That's where the music begins. And you're saying that here, where what I'm feeling and how is this related to the patient is not to be answered with a cognitive formulation, but rather to be used to help the therapist connect to his or her inner emotional registrations, embodied as somatic or emerging as fantasies concerning desire or danger.
And that's not easy. I mean, no. It's there's a paradox here, because the more you try, if you try too hard, it's really easy to lose the contact if you try too hard. You want to kind of relax, to use Manny Gent's term. You want to surrender to it.
Yep.
Like, oh my God, we're having a shitty session, you know? And the first thing I want to do is not repair it. I want to let it move me. Because if I can get in touch with that, then there could be a transformative moment where we understand what is being remembered with that, quote, shitty session. And so that so-called messy or bad session becomes a pivotal point in treatment. It becomes a diamond in the rough.
Yes. I'm thinking of a patient who not fairly frequently comes back to her session and then says, so I've had an experience of what you said last session. And everything in me goes, oh my God, what did I say? That sort of thing. Or was it a mistake? Or was it opening us up? Or all that sort of thing. So I'm on my edge of my seat every time that happens. I was just thinking, some of the times, I guess, when I've taught this chapter and about this idea of trying to stay away from cognitive formulations, attending to the affective nuances, I will start the class with "Follow me," and I'll just clap, then I'll syncopate, or I'll change the rhythm. I'll do these different kinds of things, and it's really it's a wonderful kind of thing where people feel undone and like, what is happening? How do I match with this? What are the mismatches? And what is the experience of not being solidly on my feet and my knowing? And so much of what psychotherapy is that being undone, right?
Yeah. Two things. One is at the beginning of your speaking, I had an association to the word resistance. And we generally think as resistance as something that is a negative dimension or event in the treatment. And resistance is often a gift. Because if you can go there, all of a sudden you discover something that isn't going to be said and may be enacted, or maybe it even will be withheld, like it wants to be enacted, but it's being withheld. So I think resistance is a gift. It tells us so much. So back to your exercise. One of the things that when you're playing, I also study percussion, and one of the things when you can't stay with the rhythm, you can't match it, take a deep breath and you just syncopate, and you find a place where you can add your accent or your sound and weave it in, so that's where the idea of the polyrhythmic weave comes.
Beautiful.
So you don't have to match. And in fact, too much matching, literally in the infant research, it feels like a smothering. the child who does best is matched only about a third of the time, according to the infant research.
Yeah.
The good parent, the good parent is allowing space for that mismatch. And so,
Mhm.
and similarly, if you watch dancers dance, they're not like mirroring each other.
Right,
They're kind
right.
of weaving. It's not linear. They're weaving. You know, if you could trace it, you know,
Mhm.
in three-dimensional space, you'd have this incredible sculpture at the end of the
Yeah,
dance.
yeah. Oh, that's so beautifully stated. So nicely done. Um, so we only have a few minutes left. What would you
To
want
weave
list?
together,
What's that?
to weave
To weave
together.
together, yes. Oh, which takes me back to one thing. You said you began this our time together with the word resistance. Do you know what that was about?
I think it was what I was trying to speak to just now, which is trying to find in where I think nothing of value is something rich.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, but was there resistance here with you and me?
Um, I think it's resistance to the idea that I have something to formulate that will
Mm,
be helpful. That in doing this, I always fear that somebody's going to walk away and go, "Oh, now I know what to do, and I don't have to worry." You
uh-huh.
know, I think
So maybe part of your
worrying
resistance
is
was I
very
was
important. Yeah, Adam Phillips pointed out the term worry means to work over. But
nice.
in America, we have changed that into something that's not so good, which is
Yeah,
interesting, you know, because
that's
we
very
started
nice.
out with the Protestant
Yeah,
work ethic. And of
yeah.
course, the people who were here before the Protestant work ethics
Right,
came were
right.
really working the land and living in harmony with all
Yeah,
kinds of creative things.
yeah.
So I think that's
Probably
built
part of
into
that resistance was um, would I work with you and would we have a polyrhythmic a rhythmic weave, or would I constrain you into uh, providing something or
It's interesting
providing
that
a truth?
you point that out. I'm sure that's true. My way of thinking about it is that I would end up doing what I don't want to do, which is
But
create too much of a structured, formulated
right,
presentation.
yeah. I think we did okay. What do you think?
Oh, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I
Actually,
think
I would love to look back over this and watch the weave between us.
yeah, yeah, I think it's been good. What do you in our last few minutes, is there what would you want to leave our listeners with? Anything in particular other than keep
Well,
weaving?
I think the most important issue, challenge, struggle that I'm currently in, and I like to think of analysis not as a an activity toward curing or
Mhm.
even growth, because even though I think both things are good, but I think struggle is a better word because there's a way in which you could say I'm cured or um, you know I've grown. And that could be true, and that's great. But there's always a possibility when you say that you kind of give up other possibilities, which are right there, right, you know, next to you.
Mhm.
So, and life is a struggle. I mean, you see an infant come out of the womb and they struggle to breathe.
Mhm.
We struggle to learn how to crawl, to talk.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
struggle with our patients struggle with our lives. And we've kind of used that word with it has a pejorative meaning of negativity. I think
Right.
struggle is great. And so what I'm really struggling with is the degree to which I can allow myself to receive the opacity of the patient,
Mhm. Mhm.
to look at the patient and not say, "Oh, he's a male. Oh, she's African American. Oh, um, this person has money, or whatever." To live as well as I can, which is very difficult, in uncertainty and vulnerability, and opacity,
Yeah.
and to struggle with those things, and to know that that struggle will paradoxically bring me closer to my own experience and to connecting with the other person's experience.
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. Thank you so much, Stephen, for your time. It's been very rich to be with you, and again, grateful for your contribution to this text and to our community.
At some point, we're going to play together. You're going to play the piano, I'll play the drums, or maybe
I don't know. I'm pretty stiff.
Oh, well, once we get going, we'll flow.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Okay.
we'll see you again then.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
All right.